Hey, thanks for tuning in. I put out a poll on my community tab asking which monster I should make next, and it was between Blackveil Valhazak and Fatalis. With Fatalis being the clear winner, I felt no other choice than to recreate the scene of the dragonator launching out to finish him off. For me, that was the best moment in all of Monster Hunter, and having proof of a hero play seriously drove that in. So I printed out an excellent Fatalis model I found online. I'll put a link to the STL in the description. I was surprised with how easy the supports came off, because sometimes they're a bit of a struggle. I decided to print his body and head in clear filament so that I can run an orange LED to his chest to simulate his molten glow. Fatalis' flame is so powerful that it can melt stone and metal into magma. His chest acts as an organic furnace which heats up to over 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Fatalis was also the first black dragon, which is a classification for near unkillable, world-ending monsters. Now, I fill any of the visible gaps with some spot putty. Now that all the gaps are filled, I can go out and prime him in black. I lost a bit of footage here, but I assembled the front of the dragonator by gutting two T-lights and gluing them on an XPS foam strip to serve as the chamber that the two spears pop out of. Then I attached some small scrap foam bricks using some Mod Podge. To give the build some depth, I broke apart some wooden skewers and glued them around the border. And I cut up a fish tank filter into a few pieces to serve as a metal grate. I took some of the small scrap bits and glued them on randomly to add some rubble around the base. The build is starting to take shape. I now have to make the metal protective guard that sits under the spearhead. For this, I'm going to cut up some popsicle sticks and glue them on top of each other. I leaned both sticks onto each other to make them come to a point. Then I cut up some corrugated cardboard to fill some of the empty space. Now I use some bigger foam chunks to build up the top and sides of the deck. I then drew the layout of where I wanted the activation lever to be, and using some cereal box cardboard, I cut out some rough shapes for the base of the lever. I then set up a button and speaker to play some audio when the switch is pressed. Now that I know that the button fits, I can dig out a small hole to run the wires through. Now I need to make these sheets of metal that lay on top. I'll be doing so by cutting out some squares from some more cereal box cardboard. I secured them down using some hot glue. Make sure to use the low temperature setting on the glue gun when working with XPS foam, or the heat could melt the foam. I'm going to add some detail to the sides by using some split popsicle sticks to serve as wood planks. I try to cut them into rough shapes to look more natural. The more uneven, the better. I cut up some more foam to build the large metallic door frame in the back. I plan on making the door into a molten pile on the ground as Fatalis enters his third phase. I then stack up some craft store hobby bricks to build up the stone wall. I finish off the frame of the wall with some more foam strips. I use a pen to add rivet and bolt marks to the corners. Using hot glue, I form a pool at the base of the door frame to serve as the molten metal. I then take random nicks out of the corners to add some battle damage. I'm going to be using a small PVC pipe as the base for the dragonator. And for the spearhead, I'll be cutting some Christmas tree shapes out of plastic scrap. I want to have them look like they're in the process of shooting forward and not fully extended, because I feel it would look too obnoxious. But with that, the structure of the dragonator is finished. For a base big enough to fit Fatalis, I'm using some masonite that I got from a nightstand. I'm using an X-Acto knife to scratch up the smooth surface for better adhesion. I found the placement I liked, and I glued the structure in place. I then secured the button where the lever will sit, and tucked the electronics in the back. To make the handle of the lever, I'll be using a leg bone from a dollar store bat skeleton. I then used a strip of paper to wrap around the bone, and I added some loose bricks for more detail. I cut out another foam chunk for the collapsed side of the deck, and I stacked up some more bricks so that they pile up the side. I then added some pieces of wooden skewers and fish tank filter for some variation. I cut out some more bricks to mix into some plaster for a texture paste. I then spread it all over the rubble pile and floor of the base. I made sure to smear it around thicker in some areas to give the ground a more natural look. After it dried, I applied a thick coat of Mod Podge to seal it in. I then sprinkled some sand to build up some texture. And I applied that same treatment to the rubble pile. And with that, the base is done and ready to be primed. In the meantime, we could get to work on Fatalis. I started by printing out a reference of his 3D model. First, I go over all the parts I left clear with a brush on of black. The reason I'm brushing it black rather than spraying is because the primer is too thick and the light can't shine through it. Now the light is isolated to only shine through his chest. Using neutral gray, I heavily overbrush his whole body. This will serve as a great base layer for his gray scales. I'm not trying to be careful with this step because it will typically be corrected later. I then go over his body again with a lighter dry brush of pale gray. I try to focus the lighter layers towards the highest point of the model to mimic where the sunlight would actually hit. I then do a final highlight in white with little to no paint on the brush, making sure only to hit the raised surfaces. A cool fact about Fatalis is that when he kills hunters, he can use his heat to melt them and roll around on their body and armor to reinforce his own scales. Now for his tan jaw and underbelly, I go in with a coat of grimy gray. I use a thicker coat on his chin and horns and a lighter dry brush for his chest. In an airbrush, I mix up some white ink and Gravelord gray for some highlights. Fatalis has a pink to orange gradient in the inner webbing of his wings, so a bright undercoat really makes the colors pop. For the pink, I'll be running some purple alchemy speed paint through the airbrush. Even though the pink will be the inner color, I still try to keep it on the outermost portion of the wing. For the orange, I'll be using some Fire Giant orange. I try to blend it with the pink so it looks more natural, while mostly keeping to the edge. Now for the shading. For the first shade, I'll be using Gravelord Gray, mostly sticking to the recesses of the model. And for the second shade, I'll be using some hardened leather and retracing my previous step. I put the light back in to test it out, and I'm super happy with the result. And I especially love the way that the painted scales block out some of the light. It really sells that internal fire effect. I then take some more grimy gray and paint all of his talons, spines, and fangs. And for the shading, I mix up a grimy bone wash with some hardened leather and Zealot yellow. I make sure to keep it on the lowest part of each spine and claw where the grime would build up the most. Next, I go in with some pallid bone and coat all the spikes again. I try not to let it pool so it can dry with a clean finish. I thought his mane horns can use some more color, so I touched them up as well. For his eyes, I start with a fluorescent orange base, followed by a bright highlight in deep yellow. I did a few last-minute touch-ups, and with that, I call Fatalis done. For the base, I mix some red oxide with water to make a thin brown wash. I surround the mounds more prominently, then I distribute from there. I want it to look like the ground is both muddy and wet. In the meantime, while the ground is drying, I could use some rough iron to paint all of the metal bits, the pull of the dragonator, metal grates, door frame, and top of the deck. This layer gives the metal a nice dark tone underneath, which will make the wear and tear pop much more. Castle Strayed was once a royal stronghold. It was the capital of an ancient kingdom, used as both a political center and a defensive structure against large monsters. Fatalis appeared and decimated the castle, melting hunters and soldiers alive. Their armor fused with their bodies. The castle was never reclaimed. Next, I dry brush and flick some silver on the sharp edges of the metal to look more worn and chipped. Then, I apply some more of the brown wash all over the structure to dirty it up. When applied over metallics, it sells a great rusted look. This castle is thousands of years old, so I want to make it as dirty and destroyed as I can. I then touched up a few spots that I missed, like the metal guard under the spearhead. For the spearheads, I give them a heavy overbrush in grimy gray, followed by a lighter highlight in white. And for some shading, I applied some pallid bone. Once the ground had dried, I went over any of the stone parts with a very light dry brush of pale gray to really bring out the details, making sure to hit every last brick. The wood planks I stained with hardened leather. To finish off all of the stone, I give each piece a generous coat of Gravelord Grey. For the climbing rope on the stone wall, I'll be using an onion bag and cutting it to size. I then apply it with a thick coat of Mod Podge. I wanted to make this build more cinematic, so I printed out a hunter to scale, wearing the Nergigante armor. I painted him up, using all of the colors I used today. And that's our little hunter finished. I painted up the lever and ran some Gravelord Grey through the airbrush to add some shading. For a more earthy shade, I sprayed some hardened leather for variety. For the molten metal at the base of the doorframe, I went in with some white ink through the airbrush. Starting out with white can really help sell the glow effect. I then hit the innermost core with yellow ink. And for the outer portion, I used some vibrant orange. I also make sure to hit the walls and anything that would reflect the light. To give this diorama a clean look, I lined the sides with some black felt. I made sure to tuck it tightly around the corner. And I trimmed off the excess. For one of the last steps, I paint the rim black. Then, I drilled a hole for the wires to run through. And I tucked the battery in a pouch on the back. And if you made it this far, consider subscribing. It would seriously mean a lot. And let me know what you'd like me to make next. Thank you so much for watching.